Lua is an excellent language to get started with, and in this video, I'm going to take a high-level look at some of the data types that are available within it. So the first type we're going to talk about here are nils. So here on the left, I have some code that I've written out. I'm going to try to print X, I'm going to try to print Z. I've not assigned anything to these, so they're going to come back with nil. I'm going to then assign X equals 7, and I'm going to print that, and then I'm going to assign it back to nil, and I'm going to print that. And we're also just going to print nil, and then we're going to check for nil equals false and nil equals nil. So that's what this code will do. And to run this, I just need to type Lua and then nils.lua, because that's what I've named the file. And you'll see I have nil, nil. So when I try to print something that doesn't have a value assigned, I get nil. And that goes for X and Z. As you can see, I say X equals 7, and when I print that, I get 7, and then I change that back to nil, and I get nil here, and then nil equals false, that is false. Nil equals nil, that is true. So nil is really the lack of a value generally in Lua. It's a little bit like the null value in others, or maybe the none value in Python. And so now we're going to also take a look at numbers. So numbers are a little different in Lua compared to other languages. And that's because a number can be anything. It doesn't have to just be an integer. It can actually also be floating point. So if I say y equals 3.145678, that is still considered a number. So if I print, I'm going to add a print y here, just to show you that that's going to print the same. I'm also going to print, I believe it's type y, write that. And so over here, to do this, I just need to run Lua, and then numbers.lua. And so now I have x minus 2. So x is initially assigned the value of 7. X minus 2 is going to be 5. X times itself is going to be 49. X divided by 8 is 0.875. So you can see here I have the string printing out, which we're going to talk about next, and I have the actual math being done here. And then I'm printing y, which is this longer float that I added here, and then I'm printing the type of y, which is going to be number. One thing I can also do is reassign the value of x to be a new value. So I can say x equals x plus 1, which is going to make 7 go to 8, and so the new value of x is 8. If I kept doing arithmetic with x at that point, it would be using 8 as the starting point. But there is no plus equals, times equals, minus equals operators. You have to do that with, value equals value plus minus multiplied by whatever. So there is no easy kind of operators like there are in some other languages. One particular note about numbers is that there are subtypes for here. And so you have integers and you have floats, and both are 64-bit. So next up, we will take a look at strings, and I have a couple of different values here, and we're going to go ahead and let's go ahead and print that, or bring these up. Lua strings.lua. So what I'm essentially doing here in this code is I'm assigning the name variable to equal Vashinator. I'm going to print hello world, and I'm going to print welcome to YouTube, and then I can print add variables to your string using ... And so you're watching, and then it'll print name, and then this is a multiple line string. I've also embedded a bracket here. Let's go down to the bottom here, and let's show you what this looks like without that. So print, and then I could say multiple lines string. Okay, so let's write that, and let's run this. So now we have hello world, welcome to YouTube, add variables by using ... And so notice I'm swapping between the quotes here. I'm going double quotes for this one. I'm going single quotes for this one. This one I'm coming back to double quotes because I'm using the single quotes within it. That's why you can use the double and single quotes, whichever you prefer, because there are times where you may need to use the other inside. You can... The reason I wanted to include this is you can also use the brackets inside a multiple line comments, but you need to add this extra equals in here between the first one. So like if you can use as many equals as you want between these two right here, but you have to put the same at the beginning as the end. So if you use 2 equals here, you have to hit 2 here. You cannot put just 1 here and none here. You can't use them on the inside. You have to do it on the outer bracket. If you try to nest multiples, then it gets a lot more complicated and a bit beyond the scope of this video. But it's something where if you need to be able to use those brackets inside your quote, your multi-line string, you can do that. But next up, it's got you're watching, and then it's got ... for the delineation that we're going to a variable, and then it's got name, so you're watching Vashinator, and then this is where we come down and it's doing the multi-line string. Notice that it's getting this extra space in here, so that's why there's an extra space at the beginning here. And then if the end here, I just added this multiple line string just so you could see it without the extra equal sign, because that can make it a little more complicated looking than it actually is. So just the double open brackets, double close wire brackets, almost like you were linking something in a logsec or doing a backlink that way. Next up, let's take a look at Booleans. So in Vim, Booleans. And let's go ahead and type it over here just so that we're ready to run it. So what I'm doing here is I have x equals true, y equals false. And of course, Booleans can only equal true or false. That's it. By default, in Lua, you cannot concatenate a string and a Boolean together. So that's why I've had to print these out this way. There are some ways you can kind of get around that, but for the purposes of this video and to keep this brief, I wanted to just show you this way. So first up, it's just going to say x equals, and then it should say true. And then I have not x equals, and you can use the operator not to get the inverse. So this will say false, and it's going to say not y equals, and it's going to say not y, and that's going to be true because y is currently false. So the inverse of that is true. Then it's going to check for 1 equals 0, and so it's going to test to see whether 1 equals 0, and that will be, of course, false. So when I run this, I should get true, false, true, false. True, false, true, false. So this is that first section, then this is that not x, not y, and then 1 equals 0, false. I find this easier to kind of keep in mind what we're actually looking at by putting these print statements above it when I can. So that's why I'm doing this. It makes it a lot easier to translate from code to here. So tables are a bit special in Lua. Most languages have stuff like arrays, dictionaries, lists, maybe even sets. Python has all of those, and probably another one or two that I'm not as familiar with. Lua just has tables. So they are a key value pair-based table, so a bit more like a dictionary if you're familiar with that in Python. But you can do things like treat them like arrays, you can treat them more like an unsorted list. You can get really complex with what you actually use these for. I am keeping these tables at very high level just to make this brief and easier to understand at this point. To create a table, what I need to do is I need to say T and then open and close curly braces. And to add to that table, all I need to do is have T and then the index in brackets and then the value. So I'm saying that T videos will equal the value YouTube. T paper will equal the value Scranton. And then to print all of these out, I can use this for loop for key value in pairs T, do print key value end. and that'll print that'll print the entire table. And then I'm also just going to print t.videos. Let's go ahead and run this so you can see what this is like, and then I want to come back and talk about this. So notice here I have the if statement printing this out: videos, YouTube, paper, scran. And then it prints YouTube because I print the value of t videos, which is this one here. So the nice thing about tables is, since adding a string for the index is so common, they actually just have a shortcut to do this. And so down here on this s equals and then curly braces, I went ahead and added values by default. And so channel here, that is actually the index. That is not a variable. In fact, if I change this to be inside brackets, it would be a variable at that point. So I would not want to do that, because at that point, if I was to put this inside brackets like this, at this point it is a variable, and I would need to actually come back and do quotes around this. Otherwise, it would be looking for the variable channel, which would of course be nil, as we saw earlier. So I don't believe you can store nil as a table index. I have not tried that, but I believe you have to have an actual value there, and it needs to start with, I believe it generally needs to start with a letter if you're going to use a string. I think you can use numbers and things like that, but I don't know if that would be something that people would want to. It's not as common for people to want to do that. That's not the shortcut. But like I say, so what I can do here is I can say, let's delete that last bracket. So I can say channel equals Vashinator, site equals vashinator.com. And I can print that out with just s.channel and s.site. I can go and add the brackets and the quotes like I did up here. I can do that, but that is so common that, like I say, this is the shorthand for that. So this to me is easier to read and easier to understand, but the kind of downside to this is if you don't realize that's not a variable, you might be looking around for channel, looking and expecting that to be a variable. But this is just a string. That's all this is. That's all this is. And that's all it's being referenced as here. Like, this is saying that this index is a string of channel, and this index is a string of site. If I wanted to use a variable here, then I would have to put brackets around this or around this. So like if I had a variable named site that I wanted to use instead, I would, for the index, I would have to put brackets around that. And so I can, of course, come back like we did with strings and say print, and then I can say schannel, and then ... as my concatenator, and has a website located at, and then ... to go back to my concatenate the next variable and site. And so that's where you see this last line, and it says Vashinator has a website located at vashinator.com. And of course we get the free advertising in there because, you know, nobody's sponsoring this, so I'm sponsoring it myself, I guess, or something. Let's quit this. We made a change, so it's trying to warn me that it's not happy about that. So let's quit that anyway. All right, and the last particular one we want to talk about are functions. And so we're going to go into the functions.lua file. I kept these very high level because, again, you can get very complex with these functions, and it is a bit beyond the scope of our video today. But let's take a look at these functions. So if I just say f equals, and then I just start with the keyword function, if I want to have arguments here, I need to open and close parentheses and enter the actual variables names I will be using as the argument. It's important to note that these variables are local scope to the function. So I can't come down here and actually try to print x from there because I'm going to get null, because x only exists within the function itself. Same for y here, x and y here, both. They only exist in this function. So if I wanted to try to print like the value of x is, and the, you know, and then I wanted to show the double of it, I couldn't do that without having another x variable that was outside the function. So that is really important to note. But again, this is something where these functions, you can have if statements in them, you can have loops in them, you can make them very complex. And that's what I noticed so far in my kind of looking at Lua, is while the tools are fairly simple, you can do a lot with those particular tools to get a more complex setup. So let's take a look at this really quick. And so I'm saying 2 is there, so 2 plus 2 is 4. And then I'm saying x, y, and I'm adding 1. So I'm saying 5 plus 6 plus 1, so that's 12, and that's how we're getting that. So again, these are really high-level functions here. I'm not doing anything very complicated. You could come down, and you don't have to return this all in one line, by the way. So let's go down to G here, and if I come over and I press enter, you'll notice it'll be indented. And then I would probably want to press enter again so we can get to that end down there like that. And so I could have done that. And in fact, if I just write this, it'll write and it should just run again, and it does. So that might look a little cleaner when your functions start getting longer, but you know, I could say something like if, let's say if x equals 0, and then print x is 0, end, there we go, and then return, I think that works. I may be missing something. So let's see. Yeah. Oh, gotcha. I need to say then. That's what I'm forgetting. I haven't done very many if statements just yet in Lua. So I say I, and then I say, let's do then. I don't like the syntax. I don't like how it looks there. So let's do this. Let's try that. There we go. So right now, x is not 0. So obviously, we don't get 0. But let's come down and change this to 0. And what we should get is I'd insert 0. So we should get 0, or x is 0, and then we should get the number 6, or 7 rather, because we're adding 1 to 6. So, yep, 4, x is 0, and then 7. So even though this is inside this function, like this is just going to activate just like normal, but if it's just a standard if statement in there. So any kind of loops or anything like that you need to do inside a function, you can absolutely do. And that is my high-level overview. I know that was very high level. I wanted to try to put something out there a little bit about Lua. I find it to be an interesting language. It's very simple, very flexible. There are a few other data types I didn't talk about, like user data, but that is invoked from the C API. And other things like threads that are a little bit more complicated and something where it's not something you're going to use early on. I will be likely using more Lua here as I move forward in a particular project I'm working on. I hope to share that once I've actually got to the point where it's done. But if you'd like to see more about Lua, let me know. I'm considering making a longer, way more in-depth video, but it's something where I have to see if that would be something people actually want to see. So thanks for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you next time.